Mine stayed off for 15 days. I'm sorry. Who are you? I don't remember. You guys try to get along with that.
Good afternoon. It's wonderful that so many people are here. Christy would be very pleased. On behalf of Christy's sister-in-law, Mary, and her family and relations from Iowa, Jesse and Drew, Connie's daughter and husband, Blair and Alexander, Judy's son and grandson, Christy's stepson and grandson, and our family, we very much appreciate all your thoughts, prayers, and your presence here today. I'm Mark Peterson. I've had the privilege of being married to Judy's daughter, Danita, for many wonderful years. And I'm so glad that my daughters and my wife have been able to help Judy and Christy through these many years, especially the last couple of years where Christy really struggled. Our family sincerely appreciates Danielle, Brittany, Pammy, Laura, and Joyce from St. Croix Hospice for their multiple years of care for Christy, allowing him to remain at home. And he so appreciated the musicians that would come into the house and play for him. David Allen Christensen, age 86, passed away peacefully at home on April 4th, 2024 in the afternoon. David, Christy, as he was fondly known, was born in Albert Lea on March 22nd, 1938, to Mandel and Mildred Christensen. As Christy shared with me, his dad was a macho, domineering type. As Christy would say, he was very tough on me. In a lot of ways, that shaped Christy's life, his perception on things, and his actions. Christy attended the Albert Lea school system. Later in life, Christy married his true partner in life, Judy Marie Prochnow, on August 29, 1998, at their home on Fountain Lake, visible from this building. Christy, in his early career, worked for the engineering division of the Minnesota Highway Department as a draftsman and inspector. Later, he owned and operated Albert Lea Steel until his retirement in 1996. As many of you are aware, after retirement, he remained active doing part-time work and spending time on Beaver Lake, and with friends on Mustang Island in Texas. As you will hear shortly from his friends, Steve and Tim, he enjoyed being part of the local farming community and was an avid sportsman, hunter, and fisherman. Christy traveled the USA, Canada, Africa, Argentina, and New Zealand, accompanied by Judy or his many friends. Christy was preceded in death by his parents, his brother Paul, stepdaughter-in-law Coney, and he is survived by his wife Judy of 25 plus years, 2 stepchildren, 3 step-grandchildren, and his sister-in-law Mary Christensen and her family. Again, thank you very much for being here. Steve, I look forward to you sharing a few stories.
I hope you say the same thing. All right. We're here today to remember, reminisce, and celebrate the life of David Allen Christensen. Judy had asked me if I would come up and share a few memories. I don't know that I was able to really cut it down to a few, but even though I'd known David for over 50 years, until just a few weeks ago, I really never knew his full name. Like most of you here today, I simply knew him as Christy. That is, unless he'd done something that really set me off, and then I called him by his first and last name, just like my wife will do to me or mom before me. So Judy called me the morning after Christy's passing to let me know what had happened. And for the rest of the day, I just had a flood of memories that just came in waves over me. Things that we'd done together, things that we'd seen, some of his sage words of wisdom, some of the things I hadn't thought of for years. I first met Christy when I was 16 or 17 years old. I was working on a school project that needed some 1/4-inch sheet steel. My dad ran a machine shop, Vasco Incorporated, here in town, and we'd often get steel from Christy at Elberly Steel. Walking into Elberly Steel was like taking a step back in time. Old building, lots of old equipment, that old calculator that he used. If anybody that was down there remembers that calculator, it was great. There was all sorts of interesting things around every corner. My dad had organized an annual Canadian fishing trip every spring since I was about 12, and Christy often came along with, but it really wasn't until after I got out of the Air Force in 1981 that Christy and I started spending more time together. Usually it was going on different fishing trips. It might be a 3-day trip, it might be a week or 4 trip up to Canada. Now, in order to earn a spot in my boat, you got to contribute something. You have to have some special talent. So, some of the guys will buy groceries and help pack the boat and truck. One of the guys that we've had that's been going with me for 35 years is a great navigator. He reads the map. He can find the best route to our fishing spots, avoid the rocks, and find our way back. We always need help driving on the long trips. And, some of the guys are good at cleaning fish when we get back. Some of the guys like to cook, and we all like to eat. And of course, there's cleanup after the meals. And lastly, but probably maybe one of the most important things, is we always need somebody that can remember to put the plug in the boat before we launch the boat in the lake. Well, Christy didn't do any of those things. But the one thing that he did better than anyone else, and what earned him his permanent place in the boat, was his storytelling. And what stories they were. It seemed like he had an endless supply of them. Now, to be fair, Christy always helped out wherever he could. There were dishes to be done. He was always grabbing a towel and drying. He was always trying to work. If we were cleaning fish, he'd offer to go get beer or drinks, bring them down. So it wasn't that he was just sitting around. It's just that he had the one skill was his storytelling. And he entertained us all just by being Christy. Like the one story I remember was time, and I may get this a little bit wrong, but he was in New Mexico or Arizona or somewhere. I can't quite remember where. There was someone at the bar that had claimed that they had shook the hand of Pancho Villa's grandmother. And for a quarter, you could shake his hand. So Christy paid the guy a quarter so he could say that he had shook the hand of the man who shook the hand of Pancho Villa's grandmother. Now, my father-in-law, Ray Levine, was also along on this trip. And I'm hearing Christy's story, Ray whipped out a nickel and gave it to Christy and shook his hand so that he could claim that he shook the hand of the man who shook the hand of the man who shook the hand of eventually of Pancho Villa's grandmother. So you can see there was never any dull moments on these fishing trips. I mean, they were just action-packed. On one of the long trips that Christy and I took together, we were meeting some guys up on Lake St. Joseph, which is way up in Ontario. It was just the two of us driving. We had a 16-hour drive ahead of us. We left around 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We were going to get in about 8 o'clock the next morning. And this is after working and trying to get things done at work and packing the boat and getting everything ready. And so we got on the road, had driven a while, and I asked Christy if he wouldn't mind driving. We said he'd really rather not drive pulling the trailer and boat, and he wasn't very good at driving at night anyway. So I told him, I said, then you need to keep me awake. I said, as long as you keep talking, then we're fine. You fall asleep, I'm going to fall asleep, we're both going to die. And he didn't think that should be a problem, and it wasn't. 16 hours later, we got up to the lake and hadn't felt tired or sleepy the whole time. Now, we had gone on 3 of these trips over the course of 4 years. 16 hours up, 16 hours back, just 2 of us in the truck, 6 days of fishing together. And I learned over that time that Christy had a fascinating life. We talked about everything. It wasn't an easy life. He'd worked hard for everything that he had. I don't know of anybody that would trade for his life and the hardships that he had gone through. I learned in great detail what he'd gone through with his shotgun incident when he was younger, and what he had done to rehabilitate and had to relearn to do everything with his left hand again. But what most of us would consider a disability, he never looked at it that way. I never once heard him complain about not being able to do something. He was a little bit slower. Sometimes he needed a little bit of help. He usually wouldn't ask for it, but it didn't stop him from doing anything that he wanted to do. And he never saw himself as being different than anyone else either. For several years, we even played tennis together. He played tennis with us. So my wife Sharon and I, Christy and Jay Deerdahl, another friend, would play doubles tennis. Now, Christy may not have been real good, but none of us were very good at it. But he sure looked fashionable with his white headband and white wristbands. His stories never seem to end. I mean, we've all got stories to tell, but after a while, you start hearing the same stories over and over again. Well, on the third of these 3 long Canadian fishing trips, towards the end of the trip, he was telling a story. I had to stop him. And I said, finally, I've heard this story before. You've repeated yourself. But for all that time, every time he told the story, it was something new. Christy had such an interesting way of looking at things, and he had a lot of theories about things. And we'd talk about these, and we'd share, our theories on different things. He was just as interested in hearing your point of view on something as he was about sharing his. And the thing was, he was fine if you didn't agree. You didn't have to agree. Just because you thought differently, he didn't feel like he had to try to convince you that his way was best. But he just loved hearing different experiences and everybody's different point of view. And one thing about him, you never had to worry about him telling you exactly the way that it was. He'd always tell you exactly what he's thinking, even if that wasn't necessarily the best thing. On one fly-in trip that we took in 1995 to Williams Lake up in Ontario, which had been set up by Warren Sorensen from Geneva, there was 4 of us on the trip. Christy and I fished together in one boat, and my dad and another friend were fishing in another boat. Now, this turned out to be the last trip that my dad had gone on before he passed away just a couple months later. But it was the first day of the trip. I was driving the boat, just a small tiller boat that they had provided at the cabin. I had hooked a small northern and was reeling it up, and it really wasn't big enough to net, so I was just going to hand land it. And as I got the rod up in the air and I'm reaching for the fish shook his head, the lure came out, shot up, and hit me in the back of the arm. Now it had been, and it stuck there, but it had been a cool day. I had a flannel shirt on. I had the sleeves rolled up to just above the elbow. I really hadn't felt anything other than the lure hitting, so I really didn't know what happened. I didn't really want to know, but didn't really know what happened, and I couldn't quite see it. So I turned and I lifted my shirt up to ask Christy what he saw, and all I remember is, geez, that looks bad. That is really bad. And I said, Christy, shut up. Quit talking. Be quiet. Geez, that's bad. And I could feel all the blood just rushing out of my face. I'm sure I was just as white as a ghost. I felt sick. And all the time he kept saying, man, that really looks bad. We got over to shore and we signaled the other boat. They came over, and my dad got out, and my dad had this pocket knife that he had carried forever, and the small blade of the pocket knife had been sharpened down so many times that it was more like just a pencil thin. It was more like an awl than it was a knife. And Dad was able to I guess I should explain, the hook was buried in my arm up to the bend of the hook, one hook of the treble hook. So it was in deep. And this was the first day of a 3-day trip. They weren't coming back for 2 more days. And I'm trying to think of, okay, how are we going to do this if we can't get this hook out? And Dad got in and just so skillfully, he managed to get the point of the knife in and work it around the barb of the hook, and he inched the hook out and got out. We go out and start fishing, and Christy commented about, gee, that really went good. Your dad did a great job. I'm glad I didn't do it the way that I was planning to do it. I said, well, what were you planning on doing? He said, I was just going to reach over when you weren't looking and rip it out of your arm. No, I'm glad you didn't do that, David. And like 2 minutes later, we're out casting, and I feel something hit me in the back, and Christy had nailed me right in the back with a cast, but fortunately the hooks hadn't really penetrated my shirt, and he just reached over and pulled the thing out, and we kept on fishing. Now, when it came to money, Christy was, let's just call it frugal. But that worked well for me. Christy was 20 years my senior, being, young with a young family and having a business to run. I wasn't really in a position to spend a lot of money. While he may have been frugal with his money on most things, when it came to fishing and hunting, there was no limit. And when we went fishing, whether it was in a group or just Christy and I was the money man. But on some of these trips, he would try to hand me $1,200 or $1,500 for his share of the trip. And I'd remind him that, well, last year the trip only cost $325, so it's probably not going to cost more than $350 this year. What I only figured out later is that I should have taken his money, put the extra in a kitty, and then after we had it enough to go on a trip, just announce that we're getting a free trip, and we would have both come out winners on that deal. Now, shortly after he married Judy, Christy and I had gone on a 4-day fishing trip to Lake Winnie with some other friends, and it might have been in the spring of that next year. But all the way up, all I had to listen to was how great Judy was and how great married life was and all this other stuff. But one of the things that they talked about is how much freer he was with his money now that he was married to Judy. He was so much freer with it. Well, then we stopped at McDonald's in Garrison to get lunch, and he found out that they didn't have a dollar menu. And the burger that he thought should cost him $1 was going to cost him $2.19, and he was absolutely having a fit. I couldn't stop laughing, and I just kept repeating back to him, sarcastically, "Oh yeah, I can really tell you've gotten a lot freer with your money since you've been married, haven't you?" Now, one of the subjects that would get brought up when we were fishing would be about religion. Christy had a lot of questions about religion, religion's beliefs. He shared his with me. I shared mine. It didn't sound like he'd grown up with a lot of religion. I think most of the religion that he'd been exposed to growing up was old-time tent revival evangelism. But he loved that. He just absolutely loved it. If there was something around nearby, he wanted to go. And he seemed to like when they preached hell and damnation. Years later, he saw it when he was seeking out God and went to a number of different churches looking for one to call home. Eventually, it settled on Crossroads Church of Albert Lea. Now, based on what he told me, one of the big draws was the cookies that they would serve after the service. But he was especially proud of the day that he was baptized with a bunch of others in Dan DeBoer's pond north of Albert Lea. Now, family growing up outside of Judy's family, his family probably about quintupled when he married you or more than that. But outside of that, he didn't grow up with a lot of family. I know family was important, but he didn't really grow up with a lot. I knew he had a brother. He really didn't make a lot of comments. I hadn't never really heard a lot of stories or anything about his brother. He would often comment about our daughters and how great he thought they were. Now, most people would think that a 60-year-old man still living with his parents was a little strange. Of course, Christy had a theory on this too. He felt that living with his parents gave them a reason to live so that they could take care of him. And I never really thought of it that way, but I think he was right. I mean, I think that they lived longer because he was around more and he needed help. And what finally allowed his mom to let go was knowing that Christy had Judy to take over from her when she was gone. A lot of times after getting back from Canada, we try to get together at Christy and Judy's cabin up on Beaver Lake for a fish fry. That way, all the guys and their spouses could spend time together. When Christy's health started failing, we weren't able to do this anymore, which we really missed. But even after he wasn't able to go on trips with us, we still talked about getting together after one of our fishing trips, going over to their house, having a fish fry. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. When we weren't fishing, Christy and I were usually going to lutefisk dinners. We'd try to hit as many as we could every fall. Christy and Judy have been married for 25 years, and Judy told me that they had dated for 5 years before they were married. And I'm not sure what he told you, but Christy didn't really seem to be one to share a lot of feelings or emotions and things like that. But I know from my perspective, I saw a big difference in him after he married you. So I know that he loved you very much. But by far, the best memory that I have of Christy, and the one that I hope to take to my grave, was also on one of those 3 fishing trips that we'd taken to St. Joseph. And it was on the first trip. We packed the truck, hooked up the boat, were ready to head home, and Christy said something about he had forgotten to put his belt on that morning. He must have packed it in his bag with the rest of his clothes. Well, I didn't really give it a lot of thought at the time. We had a long drive ahead of us, and I wasn't going to start unpacking the boat so he could get out his belt. So we headed south, and it was about noon. We got to Sioux Narrows. It was about time to fill the trucks. We pulled into a little gas station. Christy got out, asked if I wanted a hot dog and a pop. I told him sure. So he walked over. There was a little stand right on the outside of the gas station. So we walked over there to get a couple of hot dogs. And from where I was standing filling up the truck, I had a clear view of everything. So after he got the hot dogs, he started walking over to the edge of the parking area where they had some picnic tables set. And every step that he took, his pants got just a little bit lower. And watching all this unfold, I couldn't help but start laughing, which made him laugh, which only made me laugh harder. By the time we were done, we were like 2 schoolgirls just giggling, standing in this parking lot filling up the truck. And I calculated that there was no way that he was going to make it to the picnic table. And he's walking along with the hot dogs and drinks in one hand, and with the back of his other hand, he's trying to hold his belt up. At every step, they kept getting a little bit lower and a little bit lower and a little bit lower. So he did make it to the picnic table, but I swear if that table had been 1 step farther away, those pants would have been down around his ankles. And after I filled up the truck and I composed myself, I walked over, I took my belt off and handed it to him. I said, David, you need this a lot worse than I do. I said, I don't ever want to have to see that again. my only real regret is that we didn't get to go on that, one big last trip before he passed away. When his health started to go bad, it started to fail, we'd hope that he'd recover and we'd be able to do something, and that just never happened. In the end, though, his mind was still really sharp. Even though his body was failing him, his mind remained sharp. And I remember the last time I went over there, Judy was gone. I walked into the bedroom. Before I even got in the bedroom door, he starts grilling me about this and about that and what happened here and what do you know about that. I said, let me at least sit down before you start asking all your questions. But I know there'll be a lot of toasting, storytelling, reminiscing on our Black Stool trip this year. But I guess to conclude, he'll be missed. And I can't imagine there'll ever be another one quite like him. So that's all I have for now. That's all I can tell right now. But Judy had also asked Tim Westrom to get up and tell a few stories himself.
All right, this work? Okay. Well, thank you. I'm Tim Westrom. I had the privilege of knowing Christy since the late 90s. I'm a little younger than Christy, but he kind of right around when he sold his steel shop. When he got out of business, he started coming out and hanging around our farm pretty regularly, helping my dad and I out on the farm, and got to know him real well. He was a really fun guy to know. So I want to thank Judy for the honor to get to share some memories. And as I was listening to all the memories that were just shared, a lot of the stuff that I've got here, kind of repetitive. All right. And that's good. That's good. I hope the stuff that I share can help jog some memories in your mind that you've had with Christy and that are very similar in fashion. And he's such a great guy. So it just jogged my memory, at the very end. I'll start off with this. I feel very honored that, I stopped in to pay Christy the first half rent the day, because it was a big deal. Because we had an agreement. The landlord always gets paid, right? Good crop, bad crop. The landlord gets paid. And he always thought that was pretty fun. So I stopped to pay him rent, and he fell that afternoon. So I felt like, I got to see him before, right at the very end. He's still feeling good. Sitting up and talking. So I'm pretty blessed to have had that memory. But thinking about Christy, who was Christy? I went through, a son, a brother, a husband, stepdad, step-grandfather, brother-in-law, and uncle. He had family, right? He really enjoyed his family. Didn't I'd say the same thing with Steve. He didn't talk about his family a lot, maybe, but really could tell he really appreciated his family. But then Christy was a lot more. And I this isn't an all-exhausting list, but he was a businessman. He had a steel shop. I'm old enough to remember going in the steel shop, seeing that calculator, and some good memories there. But then, as evident by the video that's here and the stories that have been shared, he was an outdoorsman. Christy loved nature. He loved the world around him. He was a hunter. He's a fisherman, and he was a conservationist. Right? He enjoyed being outside, being with nature. But with that, it was also with people. Right? It wasn't just the going out and killing animals. That was fun. But it was the people and the experience and being connected to something bigger than him. If you didn't know, he was a landowner and a landlord, right? He was a great landlord, right? Great landowner. He liked, again, I think back to I think it was a lot about people. he sought out really good people to rent his farms to. I think Christy, wanted to farm, but he decided. I remember one time he said, I thought about buying a tractor when I was young and going out and doing custom work, right? But then I got to thinking, well, they make those. They make tractors. He goes, they don't make any more land, right? I'm going to buy something they don't make another one of. So he started buying land, right? And then, then he was able to be a landlord and be involved in that land and finding good people to farm that land. And so he took a lot of pride in that. Somebody told me one time when they heard I rented a farm from Christy, they said, yeah, years ago at the steel shop, you'd walk in there and you didn't know if he had a dime to his name when you saw him. But then you want to know if there was a farm for sale, right? So he was always interested in what the price of land was, and he really, really enjoyed land. To me, Christy was a great mentor, right? I don't know if he would have saw himself as a teacher, but if you paid attention, he had a lot of knowledge to share. A lot of good stuff. A lot of it was just stories and experiences, and boy, you could pick up a lot of good things about life. I've learned so much just by paying attention. Christy worked with steel. He was a welder. Right? We shared that connection. I had a chance. I used to be a teacher, and I got to teach welding to high school kids and to college kids for a while. I did that for a short time, and really had that connection. That was a lot of fun to talk about welding with Christy and share those experiences. Thinking back, looking at his obituary, talking about him being employed by the state, and he talked about that a little bit, working for the highway department, and he was a worker. Everything he did, Christy worked. Right, I didn't know him when he was young, but I know he worked. He worked very hard to have what he had, and he always appreciated people that did work. So you think about all those things that Christy was. I think one of the coolest things that he was to everybody in this room, he was a friend. He was a friend. That's pretty cool. I get to call him friend. We had a good business relationship. We had a good landlord-tenant relationship. But at the end of the day, he was my friend. That was pretty cool. But thinking about some fun stuff. I'll try not to ramble too much. Some of it's kind of repetitive from what's already been said. But talk about remembering Christy. I think I've talked to a couple people that I told I was going to do this. They said, well, there's probably some things you can't tell, right? So, yeah, you probably don't want to say some of the stuff. Christy, Christy was one of a kind. He could, I think, if you've been around Christy and talked with him, he could be a little blunt. He could be a little direct. Not that was always bad, but it could be. He said what he thought, and what he felt was right, and more often than not, it was probably pretty accurate, right? Probably pretty true, right? He was a pretty straight shooter, and he wasn't afraid to just tell it straight. And that I always appreciated that about him. If you weren't aware, he could be a little on the stubborn side. Even at the end here, Judy said that one of the nurses, came up and asked her if he, after him being a little stubborn in her dealings with him, asked Judy if he was Norwegian, and Judy said, "No, worse, he's Dane." It was so. I know he appreciated his Danish heritage, and that was always a conversation around our house when he was around, because my mom's Dane, and so it was always the big battle of who was more stubborn, right? The Danes and the Norwegians, and that was always a lot of fun. Christy liked to see people work hard and achieve success. He didn't have any kids directly, but he liked seeing kids do well and grow up and have success. Many times he would come with me out to the county fair when I take my kids' projects out there. We did the bucket of jug contest. He'd come out with me and he'd comment on, this FFA thing and this 4-H. Those are the best things that there are for kids. He thought, he was involved with those when he was young, and he thought that hands-on learning and showing livestock, and that was really a good thing. So he always appreciated those types of things and shared that. Christy, another memory I thought, Christy loved dogs. He had a lot of dogs. I didn't know all of them. I remember Cricket he had, and at the end here he had Ginger. But the dogs on our farm, and he'd come out, and as he got older, wasn't able to do a lot, but he could drive around. He'd show up at the farm. If there wasn't anybody around, he'd sit with the dog. And you'd show up, he might have been there an hour. And I've just been sitting here petting the dog. And he had a connection, right? And he enjoyed dogs and that companionship. That was fun to see. Um, and then getting back to people, he loved connecting with people. Steve alluded to it earlier. A lot of times that involved around some food. Um, going out to lunch. Being with people. He always had a knack showing up around our farm right after my mom had baked cookies. That was, I don't know. I think if you could smell them, a couple townships away, but he'd show up and get some fresh baked cookies. And then even though he was Danish, he really liked lefse. So that was another love of Christie's. Um, one memory that I have with him, we spent quite a few years, I'd say in the last 10 years or so, I'd make it a point to call him up and go get him, pick him up, and take him down to Mason City. When Huber Supply, the welding supply shop in Mason City, had their big open house in September, and we drive down there. And Christy had a lot of connections with Huber Supply from the steel shop. A lot of the employees there, he knew the Huber family very well, the sales guys, and that was a lot of fun taking him down there, even when he couldn't drive himself there, and had that connection, that time of a discussion with him, and that was just a great time being with him then. When he was younger and helping us on the farm in the fall, there would usually be one day or a couple of days actually. I usually have to ask him if I needed to line up some different help for the next day. And he'd say, "Well, why? I should be here." So, "Well, you're going to Lutefisk supper tonight. I don't know if you're going to make it. I don't know if you're going to be here tomorrow." I thought that was going to kill him, but he did love Lutefisk. I don't. So, but he did love that. He made sure he hit all the Lutefisk suppers and really enjoyed that as well. Christy loved living on the water. His house in town here, down in the ocean, on the Gulf, on the Texas, and then his cabin up in Beaver Lake. And I was never fortunate to see his condo in Texas, but sure had some good times at Beaver Lake and town and his house in town here. And he really enjoyed connecting with people, where there was water. That was very evident. Obviously, it's been talked about a lot with his fishing stories and the video here, and talk about his hunting trips. Christy enjoyed hunting, being in the outdoors, shooting guns in general, trap shooting. It always amazed me. As said earlier, with his disability, you would have never known it. He never complained. He shot shot deer like anybody else did. It was just amazing. And persevered through all that. And that was really a testimony. Even he never said anything about it. He just did it, and that was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. So just to see him do all that. He deer hunted with us a little bit over the years, and then some of his ground that south of our farm he would hunt on. And remember one time he went out and shot a really nice turkey, and we've got the picture. My dad and him holding up this big turkey. We thought it might be a record. It's a big turkey, and I was kind of asking him, "Hey, are you gonna weigh it up or check in to see?" Well, I might have forgotten to buy a license this year, So we kept that one on the down low, right? But it was a nice turkey, so but that was Christy, right? He was just going to go out and shoot that turkey that day. As he got older, I think it got harder to do all that stuff, right? He still enjoyed being in the outdoors, but so I know quite a few times I think it was some sincerity to it, but he was kind of masking the idea that it's a little hard for him to be out there hunting. And he'd comment, "Are you gonna go?" If I'd ask him, "Are you going to go deer hunting, Christy?" "Well, I don't know if I hate any deer that bad anymore," he said. So I mean, he'd go, "Well, we'll just not go deer hunt this year." But he had a good way of putting things. So yeah, I mean, Christy was a cool guy. Just so much to learn, so many stories. Just a great guy to get to know. As he got older, and again, I only knew him from probably when he was around 60, probably an older. So I didn't know him when he was real young. I have a perception I knew a different guy than when he was younger. Maybe a little more wild when he was younger. I'm just assuming, but I'm not trying to fault him for that, right? I'm just probably a little different. But as he got older, I know he mellowed a little bit. Okay. And some of that's probably with age and understanding and wisdom and whatever you want to say. But I know he even commented to me one time. He goes, "I don't hate anybody anymore." I thought that was a pretty cool thing. He said it pretty bluntly, in the only way Christy can. But I thought, what a profound concept, right? To get to a point where you don't hate anybody anymore, right? I think that was kind of neat to kind of internalize that a little bit and think, what are we doing? Why do we have to hate people, right? Or I mean, use that term. So I thought that was fun to hear him say that. But I think it was mentioned earlier, I also think that that idea of not hating anybody anymore grew from, I think he got closer to the Lord as he got older, right? And I know he talked about his baptism and getting closer with God and really knowing Jesus as his Lord and Savior, right? And that's all that matters. So yeah, that's all that matters. So as you're sitting here today and don't worry about Christy. Christy's just fine, right? I would hope that all of you know Jesus as your Lord and Savior. Not just to see Christy, but to not be afraid of death, because life's eternal, and God's got it in His hands, and He paid the ultimate price, so you can be saved. So, with a captive audience, just wanted to share that, because that's really all that matters. So Christy or Judy shared with me that over the last, I don't know, month or so, that Christy really enjoyed the routine of saying the Lord's Prayer at night, or reading the Lord's Prayer, I should say, at night before he went to bed. And she had a pamphlet that had the Lord's Prayer on it, and he would ask for it if he didn't have it near him. And she said, after a while doing this, like, hey, don't you know it yet? And he's like, I'd like to read it. And there's something to that, right? Having it in front of you, being focused, being deliberate, and reading. And so in closing, Judy asked if I would close out with the Lord's Prayer. And so as Jesus taught his disciples to pray, we'll bow our heads and say the Lord's Prayer, and I will close. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. So thank you again for the opportunity to share some good memories of Christy, and look forward to talking with you after the service here.
That does conclude our service for Christy. Again, the family does invite everyone to come into our banquet hall and share some more time for stories, have some coffee, and some delicious water.